Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
Hey guys, in this episode, Ellen and I are going to look at our favourite episodes from not just Series 5, but every single series, because we're really happy to be on Series 5. We've had some great times. We've interviewed some amazing people, whether that's been in real life or through Zoom. So we're going to take you through those in this episode. The first one is from me, which is Helmingham Hall. Now, I really loved visiting there. We spent some great time with Lady Tolemash, who's incredibly down to earth. It was amazing to talk to her about running, this massive house and garden. And it's funny because we called it a stately home because obviously to us, this is like a wow factor. And she said, well, actually, it's just a large manor house. So it was a really great chat. She was incredibly down to earth. And we just loved finding out more about what it takes to run such a big establishment. And we had a bit of a wander around the gardens afterwards, but it was raining. And of course, Ella Mary was worried about getting curly hair. Anyway, here's a few little excerpts. I hope you enjoy it too. While we are talking about the garden, what is your favourite area?
Oh, well, I tell you exactly where my favourite area is, where there's not a great deal to be done. So I can sit round a fire pit, which is at the bottom
finally
of the
relax.
and, a glass by my side and under a lovely almond tree. And we've got a fire pit and we sit there. And it's a very atmospheric place. You can look at the church through the gap in the trees. You can hear the church bells when they ring. And it's a place of a sort of little place where I first started to plant trees, and just wildflower sort of area. Yeah. So you're not sitting there thinking I've got to deadhead that and I've got to weed that and I've got to tidy that. Sure. So you can just relax. So that's probably my favourite.
That's nice. That's why I can't relax when I go to my allotment, because when I go there, I'm like, I can't relax because I need to do that and I need to do that, and I can see a weed over there. I can't.
I can relax easily in my garden because I'm perhaps a little bit lazy. I don't know, but I've got this policy this season where I'm letting the weeds come through. So I've actually got I've got a few nettles here, a few pineapple mayweed, and the kind of juxtaposition of the weeds with the real flowers. Like in my front garden, my neighbours must be so shocked because there's thistles coming through, but it's lovely. It's really beautiful. And of course,
a weed is a plant in the wrong place.
Exactly. What is a weed anyway?
Yeah. And my secret to success this season also has been not staking any of my plants. Oh no!
Shock horror.
What's happening? Do they fall and then pop up again?
Kind of, yeah. It just kind of works. I've got a full rose bush that is kind of like this, but the way it's kind of leaning on my Pittosporum is just gorgeous. But anyway, it's not about my garden today. So.
Oh, we're talking about your garden now.
I thought your favourite area would be the topiary snails. Now, you've got to tell us about those for a moment.
Oh, well, that whole border was what was called the peach border, and it's more or less south-facing. And I'd done a garden at Chelsea in 2003 or something like that. And I'd had to buy a lot of plants for infillers. As you know, you've got to protect your garden and have hedges, and you've got to buy all this infill, which isn't necessarily what everyone wants to buy on buy-off day. And in those days, the RHS, it would just go on a skip. Now it's absolutely so different. They're all sent off to hospices and wonderful places to give pleasure to people. But then, they'd just be loaded. And I'd spent quite a lot of money on these. And so I brought them all back, yew and box, basically, plonked them in this border and told them, what do they want to be?
Yeah.
So they slowly formed, and Chris, one of our gardeners, is absolutely brilliant. And we'd say, well, I see a head there, and I see a tail there, and these. I think the snail came first, actually.
Yeah.
He was an obvious snail, but we've got 2 little bunnies. We've got Miss Jekyll's working boot. We've got a frog prince with a crown on his head.
I forgot about the frog. Oh, I love that.
Oh, I can't wait to see these.
They're fun.
That's really cool. I love that, adding a little bit of fun into gardening. That's important, And you can walk around, all of the gardens here, and you can go from the roses and relax and the scent, and then you can walk and have some fun and see a topiary snail. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Well, I simply couldn't miss out this episode from a list of our all-time favourites, because we actually went to visit Chris Packham, yes, the wildlife hero, and my all-time hero as well. Chris Packham was so welcoming. We sat in his garden with his 2 gorgeous little poodles. We talked about his wildflower meadow. We saw that very famous, huge, big bird feeder that you probably see on TV and in all over social media. It was during season 3, and it was episode 14. And it was just so good to talk with him about how important gardening for wildlife is, all of the very many campaigns that he's involved with, and really just to meet an absolute hero for wildlife and for plants. Here's a snippet of that very interview.
But just talking about plants, obviously we're dependent on plants, but plants are dependent on pollinators. Yeah. What kind of take-home tips would you have for listeners in terms of creating more pollinator-friendly gardens in whatever space, perhaps even on balconies, very small areas? Is that possible?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm bound to fly the native flag, and we know that insects that have insect pollinators. In the UK, we've got insect pollinators. In other parts of the world, you've got birds, bats, other mammals, and so on and so forth. But ours are insect pollinators. So, our insects have co-evolved with our species of plant, and therefore they are more attracted to them, and they're better evolved to pollinate them effectively. So think about native species. If you don't do natives, you're still planting. If you're putting in a flower, you're putting in an advert for nectar, which is fuel for many of the adult mobile invertebrates, butterflies, all the wasps and flies and bees and everything else. So you're providing part and parcel of its resource, but the fuel. But that's like the fast food. That's the takeaway. If you really want a restaurant, then you've got to put in the food part for the rest of the animal's life cycle. And I think the key thing is to offer nectar throughout the season. Mm-hmm. So my garden starts with snowdrops, it then moves to primroses and bluebells, then I have a little patch over here which I put in of snake's head fritillary, which are more ornamental, lovely. But enough of them come up, and then the meadow starts to happen, and it goes through a succession of different things in the meadow. We've got the mallows at the moment, we've had umbellifers in here, we've had the vetches, they've all had their time, and then at the end of the year, just fast forward to the end of the year, I've got the ivy here, which is really important for those insects which are going to overwinter as adults, and they need some fuel to stock up before they hibernate. So that's things like red admiral butterflies, it's things like queen wasps and queen hornets, and those sorts of things. So I've done, I'm not the master gardener, but what I've tried to make sure I offer is a spectrum of nectar-giving plants, fuel if you like, across the whole of the year. So that's dealing with the fuel if you like. Now in terms of the decent restaurant, then again the ragwort's here because I had a cinnabar moth on those. I leave the grass, patches of grass long here because that's the food plant of many fly species, butterflies, so on and so forth. So you've got to be thinking again and about satisfying all of the ecology of these invertebrates, and it's so easy to find out. You just go online now and what's the food plant of, and then you can think about offering it. So again, if people would come to this garden and think it's not very structured, it's very definitely and deliberately untidy, because I'm so fed up with tidiness, but there has been a planting regime here.
I think to someone who is a gardener or who loves plants, you can see that it is intentional. That definitely you can see that.
I think just the public have a perception of something that looks a little bit wild is not great, but slowly they're hopefully realising that it's much better for nature.
And I love it how nature finds what you're giving them. I love that. Like you can literally.
I'm still waiting for the birds to find the bird seed that I put out.
Do you know? I was thinking. So you've put that bird seed feeder on your window, but they can see into the. It might be your movement putting them off inside. It might be a bit. Do you know what I mean? Like
these ones on the suction pads.
No, they do work quite well, and some of the birds which are don't mind people, things like robins. Very often.
You feed them on your hand.
Form an association. To be quite honest with you, they've got to find it. And the thing about birds is that they're living on a knife edge invariably when it comes to finding food, either to get through the winter, which is tough, or to raise their families in the summer, which is tough. What they can't afford to do is to go somewhere where there's no food. So on one occasion I had a bird feeder and it was hanging outside my office, and I had a whole gang of nuthatches would come onto my feeder. And they were there all spring, all the way through the summer. And then I ran out of food, and the people that were delivering it, there was some sort of hitch. Anyway, so I ended up not having any food for a couple of weeks, pretty embarrassing. Obviously, the birds disappeared. And when I put the food in, the blue tits, the great tits came back, and my nuthatches didn't come back. But when I peeped over into my neighbour's garden, his bird feeder was about, 10, 15 metres away from mine, covered in nuthatches.
He stole your nuthatches.
Well, they just couldn't, they haven't got the time to travel to a restaurant which is closed.
Yeah.
Couldn't they just send one representative?
Well, that's what they do.
Have a little look?
Yeah, that's what they do. And then, so eventually one of them will go on a foray. Yeah. And one thing we know about birds is that they watch one another the whole time. They will watch where they're flying, and also they were able to judge other birds' fitnesses, so they know whether that other bird has had a decent meal, it's been found a good roosting site, and all those sorts of things. So that's how that once you get one, it cascades into others. But it took me a long time to get my nuthatches back, because they wouldn't waste their time flying 15 metres just in case that restaurant was closed.
Did they come back eventually?
Yes, they did. They did.
Glad to hear it. Oh, phew.
Presumably because his bird feeder ran out and we found mine. But
did you sabotage it? Okay, my next favourite is the visit that we paid to the Orchid Nursery down in the New Forest. They're called Double H, and we had a lovely walk around with Dan, who works on their marketing and a bit of the organisation. And it was great, if only for seeing Ellen Mary's face as she saw a whole nursery full of beautiful orchids. Because for me, I'm used to these sort of things. I was working in Thompson Morgan for many years and visited lots of nurseries across Europe. For Ellen, she'd never done this before, so it was really, really cute to see that in her. And of course, it was great to be amongst those orchids, but more importantly, to get some real-time tips on how to grow the very best. And what better place to get those tips from somewhere that grows a million or more. So enjoy the episode, and hopefully you'll have your orchid reflowering in next to no time. So how about the real basics with caring for that orchid then? Okay, we've got a living room. We want to grow an orchid. Where are we going to put it? How often are we going to water it? Are we going to give it any of those crazy concoctions like eggshells and banana skins? How do we care for an orchid? Just in, say, 5 easy steps. Foolproof.
I think the first one is don't overwater. Phalaenopsis are epiphytes, so they'd be up in the crowns of trees with their roots kind of holding on, which you'll see if you've ever depotted a plant, it sticks to the edge. So it would be up in a bough of a tree holding onto it, and the rainwater would come down. So there's no real kind of sitting in water. That just rots the roots out, and that's probably the biggest reason why people kind of have failure with orchids, and that's because they just leave them sat in water and it rots the roots.
I guess people worry about plants drying out, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah. If you look at the it's actually in bark, and that bark is designed to not hold water but create kind of gaps in between which are humid, like over in Singapore, and that's where the roots, being aerial roots, take the moisture out of those gaps, so it doesn't need to be in contact with water like some pot plants.
What about the light?
Light's really important. They love dappled light, so you've still got your net curtains behind one of those.
No one has net curtains anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. No, they're really tolerant with light. I wouldn't suggest a south-facing, but any other window other than south-facing. It's a cliche with the bathrooms, but a bathroom is a really good kind of location, but so's a bright dining room or any window that's not
not right in front of the window.
Yeah,
well lit but away from bright sunlight. Isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's not south facing, it can tolerate sunlight for a period of time. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you've done all of those things, it's been in dappled light, and it hasn't been overwatered, and you've lovingly cared for it. What happens after they're flowered? What do you do next? Because I noticed that you had thrown some away.
Should I not have done? I just haven't got the patience.
Yeah, I mean, when we were at Chelsea, we found out. We chatted to a lot of people, and the success people had came down to kind of 2 or 3 kind of very simple categories, so, which is why we did it and try and kind of educate people on kind of how best to look after them. The watering was one of the key ones. They couldn't get them to reflower. The simplest way to get them to reflower is to move them to a kind of cooler location.
You were saying that you put them in cold here to initiate flowering.
That's what we do. So we move them from 30 degrees down to about 20, 24. So it's only a few degrees difference. The varieties now do tend to kind of almost kind of start to reshoot before they finish flowering. So that's something we're deliberately breeding for, to make it easier for people to
give people that confidence as well.
And it's done. It's they talk about shocking plants. In nature, it's kind of when the daylight shrinks. With orchids, it's temperature fluctuations. So once it's finished flowering, it's literally kind of look at the stem, and if sometimes it goes brown, that means the stem's kind of dying off, and you just look for the little flowering nodes. So they've got little scales up the stem, and you just cut off below one of those, cut off the brown bit, carry on watering it, and within a month or 2 you'll start to see a little spike emerging it. So, but I do understand people that don't want to wait or haven't got the room.
Go away with your judgy looks.
No, it's people.
Ellen,
that was a
Dan.
side dish of judgment there. That was. Yeah.
So at the time, we thought we were going to be really controversial, putting out an episode about CBD. This was in Series 2, it's episode 9, and we went to speak with the team at Honest Hemp. I believe that they were one of the very first producers of CBD on the market. And this was very early on in the plant-based podcast. We were really excited to go to their lab. We actually went to the laboratory, and we saw how everything was produced, and we felt a bit like scientists, and we felt really very cool. But CBD, of course, has completely taken the market by storm. And here's a little snippet from that very episode.
I think it really depends on what you're taking it for or what you're expecting to get out of it. So as Michael touched on, you've got your endocannabinoid system. So if you're feeling anxiety, it's going to go to your specific receptors and it's going to help with that. It really depends on the person. We've done a lot of expos around the UK and Europe where it's probably the only time I get to speak directly with the public about their experiences with CBD. Most of them, I think probably its biggest usage that we see is kind of for mild anxiety and for sleeping as well. A lot of people take it for sleeping. But we have a lot of people who take it for chronic illnesses, who claim it's the only thing that sort of helps them at high strengths. We've had a lot of people who are fitness, gym, and it helps them with muscle recovery. That's what I use it for.
And how do you use it? Do you apply it externally, or?
So for me personally, so when you have a tincture, if you drop it under your tongue, that's going to go into your bloodstream quicker and sort of go to the whole of your endocannabinoid system. I feel personally that's the best way to get the effects, but topicals, so if you rub those on your skin, they're still going to your bloodstream. It'll be slow releasing and it'll be targeted as well. So if you've had a workout, you've got some calf pain, you rub it on, and then that will keep it.
So after a long walk when my calves are killing me and I don't think I can walk anymore.
So we get a mixed bag from the customers, but most of our customers are returning customers, so
So anxiety seems to be top of the list.
Yeah. Such an interesting market, though. There's obviously lots of different reports out there. Nothing that you can obviously say legally. So most of this is suggested, isn't it? But there's so much information that's out there, so much chatter about CBD that people can find that and then kind of make a judgment for themselves as well, I guess. Yeah. So what would be kind of different products that you offer with CBD? Because obviously mostly we're seeing the extract, which is like CBD extract, which is not an oil, it's an actual extract. So you use that in a number of different ways, but you're actually making some different products around that as well, aren't you? From cosmetics through to coffee capsules as well, I saw.
Yeah, so we've got anything from cosmetics, any topicals. We're developing a new line of cosmetics as well. I think we're looking at, we can't probably go too much into it, but nice moisturisers, balms, things like that. But
then we also make you look young forever.
Not you.
If I can get rid of wrinkles without ever having to have Botox, I'd be very happy.
We're also looking at like food, gummies, and things like that. But e-liquids are very popular. But my personal favourite, like Leon said, is the drops and the drops under the tongue. I take them every day before bed and when I get up in the morning, and I find they're the best. They work.
How many do you take? Like how you said twice a day.
Twice a day.
How many drops do you?
So I'll take a 20% oil, and each drop of a 20% oil will have like 10 milligrams in, and I'll take a couple of drops in the morning, and a couple of drops in the evening, and take my 40 milligrams a day.
Okay. Does it help you sleep?
I wouldn't take it if I didn't feel the benefits of it. And I used to really struggle with sleep. I'll go to bed at 12:30, stare at the ceiling for 2.5 hours, thinking about all the cool stuff I'm going to do tomorrow.
I can almost feel his brain working.
I would be the same. Always at Christmas. One year I was so excited I vomited in my bed. To see that. I was that excited I couldn't sleep. So my next choice is way back from series 2, actually. And it was when we did a few different interviews around London. In North London, we actually met the girls from Handmade Apothecary. And it was so cool because we had an amazing time chatting about herbs, kind of gossiping about herbs, kind of home remedies as well. We also had a miniature forage as well. So they showed us a few different fungi and stuff and told us what we could do with them. We also ate hawthorn leaves, I believe it was, directly off the tree, because Kim told us that it was fresher that way. So we were actually kind of gnawing at the twigs and bark of a tree, which was a pretty cool moment nevertheless. But I hope you enjoy the episode. There's lots of how-to as well, little things that you can make up yourself at home all year round as well, talking about lots of different remedies. So if you've got a tickle in your throat, why not make up some elderberry syrup, for example? I hope you enjoy it. Let us know what you make up. In a nutshell, what do people need to look out for when they're foraging? Give us an idiot's guide to foraging.
Okay, so the first thing I think is to, while you do want to be cautious on foraging, is not to be frightened, because it feels like there's thousands of plants out there and you want to know them all, but actually you just need to go out and learn a few at a time. So the first thing you should do is get a few good guidebooks. I mentioned Roger Phillips's Wildflowers of Britain and Ireland before, which is a really good one because it's photographic, but it's good to get a few so you can cross-reference. So when you get a plant and you think you know what it is, look up all the descriptions and just make sure it is what you've got. But also the other thing is to find someone that does know the plant as well, because there's nothing like being shown a real plant in real life. So find a local herbalist or forager. The Association of Foragers directory will tell you by area where your local foragers are.
That is the best way to learn, isn't it? It's just with anything. If I learn about the plant by planting it and you're watching it grow, and then that's how you
exactly. So find someone in your local area that does kind of herb walks or identification walks or botany walks, and then get to know it, and then just learn a few. And then as you go to work every day, find a few that you keep seeing and learn it throughout the year. And there's nothing like learning a plant from when it comes through as a sprout at the beginning of the year all the way to it, its full life cycle as really knowing a plant, not just knowing when it's in flower or when it's in fruit. Because everybody knows an apple tree when the apples are on it, but do you know an apple tree?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
And I think a top tip that I picked up from you guys in the break is don't forage in your best clothes.
No, don't forage in your best clothes.
Yeah, you ruined some clothes that way, haven't
to be
you?
honest, all of my clothes are now foraging clothes. I'm a gardener and a forager.
You're going to get brambles ripping them. You're going to get...
If you want the good stuff, you've got to be prepared to climb for it sometimes.
That's fair enough. So is there anything that, if you're starting out with foraging, that you really need to take care of? As in the things that you might forage for and use for yourself. So, people who are breastfeeding or pregnant, that kind of thing. Yeah. Do you know that?
That's a very important thing. Breastfeeding and pregnant women, you really should get everything. You should check every time. Like with anything, like any medication you take, herbs are largely safe, but not for everyone. And depending on what conditions you have, any long-term or chronic condition should be checked. We always say it's a good idea to have these things monitored by a medical herbalist or a doctor before trying a new remedy. It says it in the book as well. But then there are a lot of herbs that are very safe and are considered foods. So like young dandelion leaves, you can eat them as salads in quite a large quantity. Lime blossom flowers, tilia flowers or linden flowers, you can eat those and have lots of tea made from that. Hawthorn berries, things like that. You've been used as food in the past, but they're also medicines because there's a fine line between food and medicine.
Yeah, you don't have to even think about really obscure herbs. You can forage in your own garden for things like thyme and rosemary and rose petals as well. So if you might want to find someone that has a garden or an allotment and go for those things first and start learning your plant families. Like the mint family is a really good plant family to start identifying at first because there's so many of them and it's so easy to identify, and you've got things like thyme, rosemary, mint, sage, and then you can start looking at the mint family out in the local woods perhaps.
Very useful family as well, and largely quite a safe family to know as well.
Yeah, because what about mistaken identity? Is there the danger that you'll see something and think it's a herb to forage and it's actually something else? Is there any particular plants that can be a problem?
For example, just in the woods here, there's a massive patch of wonderful wild garlic, and growing right next to it is Lords and Ladies, which is quite toxic. And they've got similar shiny leaves, deep green leaves, and when they grow, especially when they're very small and they're just sprouting out of the ground, it's really easy to just come with a pair of scissors or whatever and snip, and you've got both things in your basket. So it's really important, not only when you're IDing, but when you're collecting, that you're doing it mindfully and you're looking at every single leaf as it goes in a basket. If you aren't, sometimes what you might want to do with plants and with mushrooms, if you're foraging for them, is take one home with you. If you don't want to carry around loads of ID books and identify at home. And if you do that, it's really important to have separate baskets for the things that you know and the things that are things you want to ID, because the things you want to ID are potentially poisonous before you know them. So things like that is quite important.
But what does highly toxic mean? As in stomach aches, headaches, or actual something terrible?
We don't want to scare people because it can feel a bit scary starting out, but actually one of the things we do teach is the plant families to avoid. Because
when you're a novice, for sure.
When you're a novice, you might accidentally pick some arum instead of wild garlic, but it is unlikely. You just that's why you have to be mindful. You can't be thinking about your tax return while you're doing foraging. You want to be like looking at the.
We never want to think about that, do we? Come on.
This episode is one of my all-time favourite episodes. We spoke with Ambra Edwards, which is during Series 5, it was episode 3. And Ambra had just released a new book called The Plant Hunter's Atlas. And I knew that would be really exciting to read, and I'd seen online some of the graphics. But I didn't know just how completely and utterly enthralled I was going to be with absolutely everything that she had to say. All the stories, all of the history, where plants have come from, how they were found, how they found their way all around the world. I absolutely loved it. Ambra was so enthusiastic and so knowledgeable, and it was absolutely infectious. So here's a snippet from a plant hunting episode.
But I'll tell you the plant that really amazed me which is not something that's growing in our gardens, but that thing is something we completely take for granted.
Okay.
Which is the humble Brazil nut. We all eat Brazil nuts at Christmas, especially nice coated in chocolate. Here's this thing we take absolutely for granted. We got them in our kitchens, and it is the product of the most incredibly complicated ecosystem. And I was just sort of astonished when I found out about this thing. So we first hear about it from Alexander Humboldt, the great explorer, when he goes down to try and find how the Orinoco joins to the Amazon. So he's crashing through the jungle in Colombia, and they're running out of food, but happily there are these great big trees by the side of the river that have these big nuts, and they became an essential foodstuff for them. But this kind of everyday thing is quite extraordinary. These flowers it depends on a particular bee and a particular orchid and a particular very sharp-toothed rodent to grow at all. Again, everything falls to bits. So the flowers are pollinated by these great burly female orchid bees that are the only things that are beefy enough to push their way into these quite sort of stiff flowers. And the female bees will only mate with males that woo them with this particular perfume. And this learn, gentlemen, from these bees. This perfume is made from scented wax that the male bees gather from particular rainforest orchid species. So if these orchids aren't growing near the trees, the ladies aren't interested, the bees don't mate, the flowers aren't pollinated, no nuts. So if all this happens, then the flowers are pollinated, the nuts are produced. And you would think, the whole bit's done. But no, so these trees are 50, 60 metres tall, but the outer casings are so hard that even when they fall to the ground, they don't crack. So in order for the seeds, what we know as the nuts, to be dispersed, you need this little sharp-toothed rodent, this agouti, that comes along and gnaws little holes in it and opens up the outer casing. But because there are too many seeds for the agouti, that's quite small to eat all in one go, it then buries some for later. Yeah. And then it forgets where they are, and these seeds germinate, and you get the next generation of nut trees. And it's because this system is so complicated, as you heard, that it's impossible to grow Brazil nuts commercially. You have to grow them within the rainforest confines. So it's a bit like, you look at the Brazil nut, with a new respect when you know that lot, don't you?
So much. That's an incredible story. And wow, I mean, like, it just shows how the balance is so important in the world. If you take out one species, you're actually affecting so much more. Do you know what I mean? And you don't realise that the Brazil nuts, the chocolate coated Brazil nuts that you've got on your table, what they've gone through to get to that point.
The chocolate on, at least.
That's incredible. So you've got all of this, all of this amazing research that's gone into putting this book together. How long did it take you? How much research have you had to do in order to find out all of these incredible stories about all of the plants?
And also, can I add something to that question? Has it become easier over the years with the advent of the internet as well? Because I always wonder how people put books together and how that process works. So can you give us a little snapshot, please?
Well, for me, the internet was completely invaluable because I started this book just a few months before lockdown. So I'd had this happy notion that I would spend lovely long days fossicking about in the library at Kew, blowing the dust off it. And of course, that didn't happen. So, thank goodness for the internet, because a lot of the original texts written by some of these plant explorers have been digitized. So, all hail to things like Project Gutenberg and the Biodiversity Heritage Library that have digitized these texts. And actually, that was really, and it's really quite exciting. I mean, it's not something that you can do that quickly, because a lot of these sort of Victorian explorers, they come out in many volumes. They never use 3 short words where 47 long ones will do. But it is really, it's something quite thrilling about going back to the original source material and seeing the world through their eyes.
Right.
And some of them are really good writers. I mean, someone like Robert Fortune and his Tales Arrive in China. They're really very funny. Frank Kingdom Ward also is very, very funny. So they're a good read, and they're exciting as well.
Now, my other pick is also from Series 2, and this is when we visited Scaped Nature in Norwich. Now, this is what I would call perhaps the first aquascaping shop in the UK, certainly the largest. And this style of gardening, this underwater gardening, I think is mega cool. It can be as basic or as detailed as you like. And I think this is the perfect way to not forget to water your plant, because, of course, your plants are already in the water. But really inspiring. And we turned up on the day and George Farmer was there, which was really cool, because I don't think we even expected that. And he's a world-renowned expert on aquascaping as well. So it was amazing to have this 4-way conversation with him. So yes, back to Series 2. This is all about aquascaping with Scaped Nature.
First off, let's talk a little bit about the plants that are used in aquascaping. Are there some plants that we recognise? Kind of what qualities do they have? What are some good plants for beginners as well? Talk us through the plants that are in an underwater gardening environment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are lots of different varieties of plants that we use in aquascaping. And a lot of them that we would have in store, they're labelled as being easy or medium or advanced.
Oh, that's useful. That's handy for people.
Which sort of gives you a bit of a guide on the types of plants maybe you want to start with. Some of my particular favourites are epiphytes, and there's some that I started working with very early on. Things like Bucophilandra, Anubias, ferns like Java fern and trident, things that attach to wood and to rocks, and primarily sort of take their nutrients from the water column, and that don't have high requirements for pressurized CO2. They're the types of plants that I started working with really early on and enjoyed success with. And, I didn't push myself into the more advanced things, which I kind of like now. But once you get into trying to create carpets, once you try to get colourful sort of stem plants and faster growing sort of varieties that have higher CO2 needs, that's a different set of challenges that you're working with. So you can go on a bit of a journey, with aquascaping.
Yeah, just the same as gardening.
Yeah, absolutely.
You start with sunflowers and, move on.
Everything's the same, just underwater, which is what's so fascinating about it.
But you were just talking also about the rocks and driftwood that you use. I mean, what different types do you use in aquascaping?
I mean, when I was opening up the store here, actually, it was a really conscious decision to concentrate on having lots of great hardscape materials, because it's a difficult thing to actually get your hands on. It's not great to order over the internet, because you don't know what you're going to receive, whether it works together, whether you can create the sort of scene that you wanted. You really want to be able to have a selection, work with this stuff, and come up with something that works for you and what you've got in your sort of mind's eye about what you're trying to create. So we brought lots of different types of wood and rocks together. There's furrow stone, which we imported from Poland. It only comes from one place that we know of. Got terrific sort of texture and character to it. There's manzanita wood that we had flown in from California, and that's the only place that you'll get it is on the north sort of Pacific coast of the US. Again, it's a great sort of wood to work with. It's gnarly, it's got character, it's got a real sort of presence. You can create a real scene with it. And then there's woods from Africa, from Asia. There's hornwoods. All sorts of.
So your landscape within your tank can come from all over the world. So you can have a piece of California, a piece of Africa, a piece of Poland, all within your tank, and create something like that.
As our gardens are with plants from all around the world too.
Cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about hardscape is we call it the hardscape, the wood and the rocks.
Right.
The style of aquascapes that you see here at Scaped Nature, they're very much based on the nature aquarium philosophy. which was pioneered by a guy called Takashi Amano, a Japanese guy, sadly passed away. But he invented this style of aquascape where you're using elements of nature, i.e. wooden rocks and live plants, put them into the aquarium space and having this essence of outside nature and bringing it into the aquarium. So when you look at the aquascapes you see, they're all different styles, but they all have this common theme of being a slice of nature in the aquarium. And so with the hardscape, that's a fundamental element to the creation of the aquascape. So you're really heavily relying on the use of wood and or rocks. And these are like the backbone of the aquascape. So you put these in first. These are like the skeleton, if you like, and then you build the flesh around it with the plants. So it's really, whenever I talk about aquascaping to beginners especially, if they want to create a high impact aquascape, it's really worth investing in good quality hardscaping materials.
Same as gardening. It has so many similarities though.
And what plants would you recommend to beginners, George? What would be some plants that maybe people might recognise that are related to some plants that grow in our gardens day to day?
Yeah, you use some like real classics like lobelia, bacopas. They're relatively easy. Okay,
because they're names that people would recognise, but these are very different underwater types.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's worth talking a little bit about plant physiology. In nature, 95% of aquatic plants will grow out of water, which we call emergent growth. So in the jungles, in the rivers, in the dry season, which is most of the year, the plants are growing out of water.
Yeah.
And they actually prefer this. They have more access to CO2 in the air, they have more access to light, they're more robust because they have to physically support themselves in the air. And then when the flood seasons come, they get flooded, and then the plant has to adapt to its submerged growth, and it becomes actually a lot trickier for the plant to live and survive. And so you'll find the best kind of more robust plants that survive underwater are like the epiphytes. So these are plants that are in nature attached to wood and rocks. So Java fern is one of the most popular. Anubias, which will thrive in the shade. Bucophalandra, which comes from Borneo. It's the only place in the world that it comes from, the jungles in Borneo. Various aquatic mosses as well. And these are all super hardy, super easy, don't need lots of light, don't need CO2 injection, don't need lots of fertilisers. So these are the plants that I'd recommend for beginners.
Back in series 1, this was only episode 2, I've chosen a little piece from our interview with Hench Herbivore. That's Paul Curtin. He is a vegan nutritionalist and a PT. And in fact, after we met with him and he gave us so much information about how good plant-based eating is for you, I actually switched from being vegetarian to being vegan. So that's now well over 3 years ago that I've been vegan, all because of this very episode. So I hold it very close to my heart. And of course, it's the true plant-based episode for the Plant-Based Podcast. So after that, I also done some personal training sessions with Paul and worked with him on a couple of bits. And he is an absolute inspiration. And I just really wanted to include this in one of my favourite episodes of all times so that you got some information and some fun about plants for your very good mental and physical health well-being.
So obviously you are working out a great deal, so you've got to put all of the right nutrients in your body in order to sustain that level of workout. So how do you do that? What do you eat? What do you eat in a day, and then when you work out, what do you eat to work out and to recover, all of those kind of things?
It's kind of the same foods over and over in terms of how I make up like a plate of food. Yeah, so I've got my legume, my whole grains, my vegetables, a little fruit, a little nuts and seeds, little herbs and spices. Now that may come as a curry, like as a wrap, all different ways, but I'm basically basing it around those foods. Yeah. Breakfast typically will be like a porridge or a smoothie,
I had a smoothie this morning. See, now I could work out.
She made me have a smoothie as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So,
I feel alive.
So, like, a base will be like bananas, something like that, or maybe some dates, like real sweet, like give it a nice flavour. Some berries, perhaps, most antioxidant-rich fruits. Little greens, which you won't notice in there. Flax and chia seeds are huge. They are so helpful. They're high in omega-3, low in omega-6.
And they're great fibre, aren't they, for moving everything
great
through?
Fibre. For a male, the lignan content in flax seeds is like 100 times any other foods. The men with the most lignans in their prostate fluid had the least prostate cancer. Every other 85-year-old, whether it kills them or not, will have prostate cancer.
Yeah.
But again, this is a way to avoid that.
That's incredible.
You can put some white beans in there. Again, you wouldn't notice. I use a couple of scoops of protein powder just because I'm larger than your average bear. But to be fair, you could do it with more beans. And people worry about the beans and things we were talking earlier about the gassing.
Yeah.
What you will find, we will basically change your gut microbiome. Depending on what you eat, you're either Prevotella dominant or Bacteroides dominant. Bacteroides eat, animal proteins, fats, sugar, alcohol, all the junk. The good strains, the Prevotella, they eat whole plant feeds. They eat fibre and resistant such. Once we preferentially feed those, they'll bloom. They won't have the Bacteroides, and they process the plant foods. We won't get the stomach upset.
Okay.
And particularly if you've not got meat in the way, slow in the process. Whole plant foods take 12 to 16 hours to go through the human body. Omnivorous eaters on average 4 to 5 days because of the lack of fibre, and so these things are fermenting behind the meat, and now we're getting the flatulence and the pain and the dysbiosis.
Wow, plants are basically amazing in all respects. So, so you've had your porridge, you come and work out. What do you do then? Do you eat after a workout? Or?
Yeah, so I eat 4 times a day just for convenience. I'm trying to eat a high volume of food, and as I say, it's the same types of food. However, I'll be cooking them different. Steam frying rather than using oil. I use water. As I say, curries, chilies, soups, casseroles, all this sort. You can bake burgers and falafel with legumes and whole grains and vegetables. They're very delicious.
And do you avoid energy slumps? And how do you avoid those? Like, what would you drink or eat for energy? Like, because a lot of us rely on coffee. Do you rely on coffee, or are you?
To be honest, like I do use a bit of caffeine, and it's my kind of bugbear, and it's not. There's mixed science, but I think really it is a neurotoxin. So basically, it's toxic to our body. So we heat up to try and sweat out. Our heart rate goes up. We're trying to pump it around and pump it out of our body. If you're having like teas and coffee, like that is a leaf. It is a bean. So there are health aspects, and so it's a bit mixed. But I say for the masses, try to get off it. If you're sleeping well, that's key, sleeping well. And the food I'm eating, it's all the best energy food, is clean. I've got so much more energy as a vegan than versus an omnivorous eater.
That's incredible.
I remember seeing a documentary once, and they did this test where there were these cyclists, and they each had a different kind of dose beforehand, and some of them had energy drinks such as Red Bull, and one of them had a natural drink that was just beetroot juice.
Yes.
And they were actually the quickest.
Is that right?
Had the most energy, yeah.
There's a lot of science on beetroot juice. Now, so the latest science says around 140 mils, 2 to 3 hours pre-workout, and it's a vasodilator, so the blood's getting around the oxygen, the nutrients. We're getting rid of the waste products easier. Beetroot juice and also dark leafy greens, they contain these nitrates, which we make into nitric oxide.
So you just have to watch out for red pea when you have red pea.
But that's, I can live with that.
So don't forget when you've gone for a wee,
and then go to the doctors and say, how?
The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.